Dr. Yusra Suedi, who is an assistant professor at the University of Manchester, joining us from Geneva in Switzerland. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. So the legality of the U.S. invasion on Venezuela is, under international law, certainly under scrutiny, even in the United Security Council.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I think that the question of the legality under international law is fairly clear in this instance. The U.S. invasion of Venezuela is a clear example of the use of force. This is a cardinal rule of international law, that the use of force is prohibited. This was firmly decided by all states following the Second World War, enshrined in the UN Charter. There really are only two exceptions where the use of force can apply. The first is where the UN Security Council has authorized it, and the second is where a state is acting in self-defense. Now, in this situation, neither of those exceptions is applicable here. Venezuela did not attack the US, nor was it about to, and there is no UN Security Council mandate either.
And when you're looking at the mandate, right, because as we listen to the different countries in the UN Security Council, for example, what international law says, especially when it comes to a country violating its provisions and questions being raised about a permanent member of the UN Security Council now doing this?
So when a country violates international law, it is considered legally responsible for its actions. And other states or international institutions can respond in several ways, including diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, or referral to international courts and tribunals, depending on the type of violation. What we've seen just now in the UN Security Council is a discussion that, in my view, came too late. I believe that there was legitimate concern that the U.S. had relating to global peace and security with respect to activities going on in Venezuela. This should have first and foremost been brought collectively to the UN Security Council for deliberation as per international law.
So when you look at the United States, for example, and its history, does it appear to be a country that has respected international law?
I think the US has always had a very complicated relationship with international law. It has, on the one hand, been at the forefront of shaping international law and institutions. It helped establish the League of Nations, the UN. It serves as a permanent member on the Security Council. It even supported the creation of the International Criminal Court. But at the same time, on the other hand, it frequently pushes back against international law, selectively complying with or even outright rejecting rules where they clash with national interests, as we've seen here.
So if a country, for example, is to break international law, can it still be, trusted, especially when it comes to acting as a protector of global citizens?
This is an excellent question. There's no doubt that the US's behavior over the past few days raises serious concerns about its role as a trustworthy guarantor of human rights and a protector. So some will argue that the US acted as such to rescue the people of Venezuela who have long suffered under the Maduro regime. And I'm not downplaying that at all. But when the same state so blatantly violates international law to allegedly reach those ends, it does raise questions about how much it can be trusted. And it's important to also note that there are several other motives that have been indicated and discussed as a reason for this shocking intervention, such as interest in oil. So the mixed intentions further raise questions of trust.
And so when we're raising these questions of trust, and especially because you've got a UN Security Council now that is currently debating what exactly is going on, can the US be trusted to abide by what the Council says, or can we see another moment where there's a veto here?
It's difficult because the US is placed on a pedestal of sorts within the UN Security Council, of course, being a permanent 5 member holding a veto. And of course, that would definitely weigh in as an impediment if the Council were to even consider the possibility of adopting a resolution, for example, that would enable the UN to take more enforceable measures, for example, sanctions. That is something that the US would undoubtedly block.
So when you look at for example, the ICC and the ICJ, what role do they play in a crisis like this, especially when it comes to accountability?
So the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, it resolves disputes between states on all matters of international law. But in this instance, it does not have the competence to resolve this dispute between the US and Venezuela. So there are many ways that states can express that they consent for the court to intervene in this issue. This has not been expressed here, so there isn't a way for the ICJ to intervene. As for the International Criminal Court, this is a different court, also based in The Hague, but it prosecutes individuals for international crimes. So there's no doubt that here the US has committed an act of aggression, and that is an international crime. But unfortunately, the ICC cannot prosecute for the crime of aggression unless both the aggressor state and the victim state are ICC members. Now, while Venezuela is an ICC member, the US is not.
So what happens now, especially because we're watching the developments in court as well, and this is a matter that we do understand, according to some of those who are watching this, can in fact take years even.
So with respect to the legal proceedings currently underway in New York, I think it's important to draw a distinction and a line between US law on the one hand and international law on the other hand. So we've heard a US position just now at the UN Security Council, but also elsewhere, where justifications have been given and claims that this is in fact lawful under US law. But this does not absolve the wrongfulness under international law. And even if we were to say that it were lawful under US law, that does not erase international responsibility. So that's something very important to bear in mind. As for where we go next with this, I think that it has never been more important for states to call out what is happening as a clear breach of international law. We heard certain states in the UN Security Council do that just earlier, Denmark amongst others. But I think it's important to make clear to the world at this juncture that there is no precedent being set for future threats that Trump has been very open about in the last few days with respect to Greenland or Cuba or Colombia, for example. So international law must be applied consistently and boldly, and it must be called out for the flagrant violations that we've seen over the past few days.
And given the questions that have been raised about the transformation of the UN Security Council, do you think this is a Security Council that can do that, can go beyond just calling out?
It's definitely a UN Security Council that should be able to do much more than calling out. In fact, the UN Charter equips the UN Security Council to act and to take measures in situations where peace and security are being threatened. At the moment, what we're seeing is the Security Council as a forum for states to clearly announce their positions and make their positions clear on the record, not only for other members of the Security Council, but also to the media and to the wider public. We just saw China and Russia, for example, expressing how that they are very much against what we've seen happen. So at the very least, it can serve as a forum for peaceful and democratic discussion, although, as I said, perhaps slightly late. The goal would be to mitigate against what we've seen happening over the past few days.
Dr. Suedi, I can tell you what, I think you and I are going to probably be having this conversation for quite some time, given the latest developments, but I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking to us. Dr. Yusra Suedi there, who's an assistant professor at the University of Manchester, joining us live from Geneva in Switzerland for us there, bringing us the very latest, some analysis on this particular story.